The sirens on the tarmac were screaming when Ryan Keller stepped between the guns and the plane. Wind from the idling engines tore at his safety vest. Floodlights washed everything in harsh white, catching the fear in a dozen faces. 2 airport police officers had their hands hovering over their holsters. A federal security agent was barking orders into his radio, red-faced and furious. On the portable stairs, a foreign mechanic shouted back in a language nobody else understood, his hands-raised voice cracking. Behind the glass of the VIP lounge, the airline's CEO watched with her jaw clenched, flanked by anxious executives. One wrong word, one wrong move, and this turned from security incident into international news. Ryan could feel every eye on him, feel the old part of his brain that remembered night raids and bad intel. The translator hired for this visit was stammering, getting it wrong, making the tension worse. The mechanic yelled again, louder, desperate. And that's when Ryan did the one thing nobody expected from a guy who threw bags for a living. He stepped forward, lifted his hands, and answered in flawless, unbroken Farsi. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." His name was Ryan Keller, 35 years old ramp agent at Northfield International Airport outside Atlanta, Georgia. On paper, he was just another guy in steel-toe boots and a neon vest, spending his nights wrestling cargo pallets and frozen luggage in the roar of jet engines. Off paper, he was a widowed single father who slept in 3-hour chunks and knew exactly what every dollar in his bank account was doing. By day, what little day he saw, he lived in a small rented duplex on the south side with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Her drawings covered the fridge, the walls, the back door, all in crayon. Most of them were of airplanes, and of him holding her hand, stick figures with big smiles they didn't always feel in real life. What nobody at the airport knew, what his supervisor never cared to read in his old file, was that Ryan had spent a decade in the Air Force as a linguist and intelligence analyst. He'd learned Farsi in Monterey, picked up Dari, and some Pashto overseas, spoke decent Russian and Spanish too. He had a degree in international studies he'd finished online between deployments. There was a time when he sat in windowless rooms listening to scrambled radio, his translations routing straight to people in suits. All of that ended the night a drunk driver ran a red light and smashed into the side of his wife's car on her way home from a nursing shift. One phone call, and his world went from staff sergeant with a plan to 32-year-old widower with a toddler and no childcare. He took an honorable discharge, moved back to Georgia to be near his aging parents, and grabbed the first job that would keep a roof over their heads, ramp work for Skyway Continental. The work was brutal and honest. Rain, ice, heat waves, Christmas rushes that never seemed to end. His supervisor, Dale, had no patience for special circumstances. The good shifts, the promotions to operations, or the cushy jobs inside the terminal always went to guys who could stay late, grab beers, be flexible. Single dads who had to race home before daycare late fees. They stayed on the ramp. Ryan didn't complain. Not out loud. He just showed up early, did double the work, and then went home to read Lily bedtime stories in a voice that pretended he wasn't exhausted. Then one Tuesday night, everything tilted. He was kneeling under a conveyor belt in cargo bay sea grease on his hands, trying to coax a stubborn motor back to life. His phone buzzed in his chest pocket 3 times in a row. The ramp rule was clear, no personal phones on the floor. But the number flashing across the screen made his stomach flip. Washington, D.C. He hesitated, listening to the belt grind and whine. Lily was safe at his parents' place. No one else ever called from D.C. He glanced around. No one was looking. He stepped back behind a towering stack of freight crates and answered in a low voice. Hello? The woman on the other end didn't speak English. She spoke rapid Farsi. And as the words hit his ear, Ryan realized two things at once. Whoever she thought she was calling it wasn't a baggage handler in Georgia. And just beyond the open cargo door, walking past with a small entourage, was Skyway Continental's CEO, watching him talk in a language his own company didn't even know he spoke. The next morning, the airport was wrapped in a gray, early January haze, the kind that coated everything in a thin chill even inside the terminal. Ryan clocked in before sunrise as usual, stepping into the break room where the overhead lights hummed and the coffee tasted like burnt pennies. He stood there for a moment, pouring a cup he didn't want just to have something warm in his hands. The CEO's gaze from the night before still pressed on the back of his mind. He hadn't meant for her to overhear a single word. He hadn't meant for anyone to know he understood that woman on the phone. It wasn't his world anymore. He kept telling himself that. The language, the codes, the stakes, he'd left all of it behind when Lily lost her mother. He'd made that choice. But life had a bad habit of unearthing the parts of yourself you tried to bury. He took a sip of the weak coffee. Across the room, his supervisor, Dale Granger, was pretending not to stare. Dale always pretended that with arms folded across his chest, lips pinched into a permanent line, like he resented gravity for keeping him on the ground. He was the kind of man who believed hierarchy made him important. The kind who inspected your gloves before he said good morning. Ryan nodded politely. Dale did not nod back. Instead, he lifted a clipboard and smacked it onto the counter with a loud thwack, making a few ramp agents glance up. "Keller," he said, without looking at him, "I heard you were taking personal calls on the tarmac last night." Ryan set down his cup. "It was a misdial. I stepped aside." "I handled it." "Stepped aside?" Dale repeated the words, coated in a mocking drawl. "You know the rules. You break protocol on my shift, you put everybody at risk. That's how bags end up in the wrong city. That's how we get delays. That's how security starts breathing down our necks." Ryan exhaled through his nose, calm, steady. Nothing went wrong. The line wasn't from here. But Dale raised a hand sharply, cutting him off. "Don't explain. Just listen. You want to talk fancy to people from overseas? Do it on your own time. Out there, you keep your head down." The break room went quiet. A few guys shifted, suddenly fascinated by their boots. Ryan didn't respond. He couldn't not without sounding defensive, and that never helped. He picked up his coffee, carried it to the sink, and poured it out. The hollow drip echoed in the still room. Dale followed him, with his eyes smirking. That alone might have been manageable. Annoying. Routine. But the next part of the morning made everything feel tighter, meaner. Around 9:15, the operations office called for him. Not unusual. The ramp was short-staffed, and they often pulled him to help with heavy inbound flights. But when he walked into the office, 3 supervisors, Dale, a woman from scheduling, and a younger manager named Brooks were sitting in a half-circle, all with the same stone-faced look. "Keller, shut the door," Brooks said. He did. His stomach tightened. Brooks leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We're getting reports you were engaged in some kind of personal exchange with a restricted maintenance crew from an incoming flight last night." The words didn't make sense at first. "A what?" Ryan asked. "Don't play dumb," Dale barked. "You were seen speaking to that foreign mechanic during the turnover, in a language apparently, one we don't know." Ryan stared at him. "That man was having trouble with a part number. He was trying to communicate it. I was helping the translator, that's all." Dale scoffed. "Helping? Sure. A ramp agent who speaks Middle Eastern," Farsi Ryan corrected before he could stop himself. The room froze for a half beat. Brooks frowned. Let me get this straight. You can translate. What did you call it? Ryan swallowed. It's just a language I learned a long time ago. And why, Brooks asked slowly, does a luggage handler in Georgia know Farsi? The question hung heavy in the air, thick with suspicion. Not curiosity. Suspicion. Ryan squared his shoulders, his voice even. I served in the Air Force. It was part of my training. Brooks leaned back, covering his surprise with a cough. Dale, however, wasn't hiding anything. He crossed his arms and smirked again. Well, congratulations, he said. But that doesn't give you permission to undermine protocol. You caused confusion last night. Security flagged it. We don't need that kind of attention. I didn't cause anything, Ryan said quietly. I prevented it. If that mechanic hadn't been understood, Dale slammed the clipboard onto the desk so hard it snapped the silence. This isn't a debate, Keller. You stick to your role. You want to be a hero, join the movies. You want to work here, follow orders. The room stayed still for a long second. Brooks finally spoke. From now through the end of the month, you're assigned to Overflow Baggage Zone M. Ryan blinked. Zone M was the worst assignment in the entire airport. Dark, cramped, and old belt system with brutal jams. Only 2 people at a time worked it, drowning in noise and blistering heat from the machinery. That zone needs attention, Brooks added. Since you like stepping out of place, we'll put you somewhere you can't. It wasn't punishment on paper, but everyone in the room knew exactly what it was. Ryan nodded once. Understood. He walked out without looking back, feeling the weight settle deeper on his shoulders. Not anger, just fatigue. Bone deep. By early afternoon, Zone M lived up to its reputation. The belt screeched every few minutes. The air smelled faintly of rubber and old oil. Dust coated everything, and a space heater on the ceiling blasted miserable hot air, though it was freezing outside. Ryan worked in silence, pulling stuck suitcases through gaps that seemed designed to trap them. Sweat pooled under his collar. His gloves wore thin in 2 hours. Halfway through the shift, during a rare lull, he checked his phone during a permitted break. 3 missed calls from his dad. 1 voicemail. He played it. Hey son, hate to bother you at work, but Lily had a rough morning at school. Some boys made fun of her for her dad working out there. She didn't want to tell you. She cried herself to the nurse's office. Call me when you can. Ryan closed his eyes. 2 emotions collided: worry for Lily, and that old bitter sting of being less than in the eyes of people who didn't know a thing about him. He leaned against the metal wall, letting the heat from the machinery thrum through his back. He didn't want his daughter to ever feel ashamed. She knew he worked hard. She knew why. But kids didn't understand widowed fathers and flight schedules and double shifts. They understood status. They understood what other kids whispered on the playground. He pressed the phone to his forehead and exhaled slowly. He called his dad on break number 2. She's okay now, his dad said. She's drawing airplanes again. But she said something. Something you should know. Ryan braced. What did she say? She said she wishes people could see what you're really like. She said you're the smartest person she knows, but they treat you like you're invisible. Ryan swallowed hard, forcing himself to sound steady. Thanks for telling me. Work the rest of the afternoon became a haze. Bags and bags out, sweat dripping, machines whining, the kind of shift that numbed your senses. Toward evening, an announcement came over the crackling loudspeaker: Keller report to Gate 47. Immediate. He looked up. Gate assignments weren't thrown around lightly. Something was happening. He grabbed his jacket and jogged toward the terminal. When he arrived at 47, 2 airline cops were talking to a passenger who looked distraught, waving her arms. A child stood beside her, maybe 9 years old, face red with frustration and fear. Their dog carrier sat nearby, the tag dangling. A baggage mix-up. Not unusual. Except the mother turned on him quickly, her voice sharp with panic. "Are you the one who handles the luggage?" "My daughter's therapy dog is missing. They put him on the wrong flight." Ryan felt the sting of the accusation, but he steadied his tone. "Ma'am, we're going to find him. I promise." The little girl wiped her eyes and tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, he's trying to help." But the mother wasn't listening. "This airport is unbelievable. They hire anybody, don't they?" A security officer stepped in, trying to calm things down. The girl kept staring at Ryan like she wanted to apologize for her mom. He knelt down to her level. "What's your dog's name, buddy?" she whispered. "Okay," he said gently. "Then we're going to bring Buddy home." She nodded, trusting him, even as the adults didn't. Within minutes, Ryan slipped into the bowels of the airport, checking manifests, double-checking belt logs, scanning flight transfers. The dog had been rerouted to an incorrect connector, but not far. Still in the building. He found the terrified little terrier in a side hold, near gate 52, shaking tail tucked. He crouched down, whispering softly, letting the dog come to him. It reminded him painfully of calming Lily through night terrors after her mom died. When he carried the pup back through the crowd, the girl gasped with joy. She ran forward, grabbing the dog from his arms, hugging him fiercely. Her mother's relief melted into embarrassment. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "It's okay," Ryan said. "You were worried." For a brief moment, her eyes softened, not at the dog, but at him. Like she finally saw him as a person, a father, someone who lived a life beyond the badge on his vest. But that moment shattered instantly when Dale appeared behind him, arms crossed. "Keller," he snapped, "you're supposed to be in Zone M. Explain why you're wandering around here like you own the place." The mother stiffened. The little girl hugged her dog tighter. Ryan didn't flinch. "Dispatch called me. I was assigned." "No," Dale barked, stepping closer. "You abandoned your post. Again." He said it loud enough for the passengers still standing around, watching, listening. Whispers started. Ryan stood straight. Calm. Controlled. But inside, something twisted painfully. This wasn't about the assignment. This was about humiliation. About control. About putting him back in his place. Dale jabbed a finger toward the baggage doors. "Get back to Zone M. And Keller, one more screw-up and you're gone." Ryan held his gaze a moment longer than he should have. Then he turned and walked toward the maintenance corridor. Not angry. Not defeated. Just done pretending this pressure wasn't building toward something. As he pushed through the heavy security door, leaving the crowd behind, he felt it clearly for the first time. This wasn't going to hold much longer. Something was going to break. Ryan didn't even make it 10 steps down the service hallway before the alarms hit. A sharp metallic klaxon blared through the concrete corridor, bouncing off the walls in frantic echoes. Red strobes flashed overhead, splashing color over the pipes and electrical conduits. He stopped mid-stride, every muscle tightening in instant alert. A voice crackled over the airport intercom, urgent, clipped, strained. "Attention all units, we have an emergency at Gate 62. Repeat emergency at Gate 62. Mechanical crew requesting immediate language support, critical safety issue on an active taxiway. Language support. Critical safety issue." Ryan's stomach dropped. Gate 62 was one of the busiest narrow-body gates on the North Concourse. If something mechanical went wrong out there on the taxiway with a live aircraft, timing mattered. Communication mattered. One wrong phrase, one misunderstanding could mean blown tires, wrong signals, emergency evacuations, even collisions. He paused for half a second, weighing the crossroad in front of him. His assignment was Zone M. Dale's voice still rang in his ears. One more screw-up, and you're gone. But then he heard something behind that order. Lily's voice from the night before, trembling through the phone. People don't see what Dad is really like. He saw her face in his mind, small and determined, clutching her sketchbook of airplanes. He felt the weight of every time she'd hidden her tears, so he wouldn't feel worse about the world's cruelty. And deeper than that, beneath the exhaustion and the humiliation, another voice rose, one he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. His wife's voice. Promise me you won't hide your gifts. Not for me. Not for anyone. He didn't think anymore. He ran. Gate 62 was chaos when he burst out of the utility stairwell. Bright orange cones littered the tarmac. 2 aircraft tug operators were waving frantically. A cluster of mechanics surrounded an idling plane, its left landing gear still warm from a cross-country flight. Steam hissed from the wheel assembly, and one of the ground fire crew had a hose poised but not spraying, waiting for instructions. 3 police units had pulled up. TSA agents were on the phone. One of the mechanics, dark-haired and sweating through his overalls, yelled to the translator beside him, who shouted the wrong thing back toward the supervisory team. No, not pull out. The mechanic cried. The translator panicked and, guessing, shouted toward the fire crew. Back away, he said, back away. No, the mechanic shouted louder, shaking his head violently. Not back, disconnect, or it explodes. Even Ryan understood that much, and he wasn't even close enough yet. He sprinted across the marked lanes, waving his vest to signal friendly approach. An officer moved to intercept Hand, hovering near his holster. You can't be here, the officer barked. This area is restricted. Ryan pointed at the struggling mechanic. He's requesting language support. Let me through. Who the hell are you? The officer demanded. Ryan didn't break stride. The only guy in this airport who actually speaks his language? The officer hesitated just enough for Ryan to slip past. He reached the group of mechanics in seconds, lungs burning. The head mechanic, eyes wide, face smeared with hydraulic oil, turned and grabbed Ryan's sleeve. You speak? The man asked desperately. Ryan switched tongues instantly. In fluent, precise Farsi, I speak. What's happening? Tell me now. Relief and fear collided in the mechanic's expression. The brake assembly sensor is lying, the man said in a rush. It's overheated. If the crew pulls the plane into position, the fuse will blow under the cabin weight. We need to vent pressure from the secondary line right now. Ryan didn't hesitate. He turned to the fire crew and supervisors and shouted in English, loud and clear. Do not pull the plane forward. The sensor is faulty, and the brake line could rupture. They need to release secondary pressure manually. The fire captain frowned. Who authorized that call? I did, Ryan said. And if you don't act, that wheel well's going to go up like a magnesium flare. The captain didn't like the tone, but he liked the logic. He barked orders to hold all movement. The tug operator froze the aircraft where it was, but then the second mechanic shouted again, pointing at the emergency cutoff. The translator fumbled, shaking. He says, turn off the heat. No, Ryan corrected, switching back into Farsi. Tell me exactly. The mechanic wiped his brow. We need to force bleed the auxiliary valve, or the heat spike will travel to the main tank. Ryan translated directly. They need access to the bleed valve now. Open panel 14B. The nearest supervisor shook his head. We need authorization. You don't have time, Ryan snapped. The mechanic added something else urgent, rapid, terrified. Ryan listened, heart pounding. Then translated with absolute clarity. If you don't open the panel in the next 30 seconds, that line ruptures and you endanger every soul on board. That did it. The fire captain cursed and waved the team forward. Move open 14B, now. 2 crew members sprinted with tools. Ryan crouched next to the main mechanic, relaying every instruction, every measurement, every warning. They worked in sync, the mechanic's hands flying over the panel, while Ryan relayed torque values, pressure levels, and warnings to the fire crew. Sweat ran down Ryan's spine. The heat radiating from the gear was blistering. The mechanic muttered a prayer under his breath as he loosened one last bolt. Pressure releasing, the man said. Slow. Slow. That's it. Hold. A loud hiss broke through the air as the valve bled steam, releasing the trapped heat in a thick plume. Ryan shielded his face, bracing for the worst. But nothing exploded. No rupture. No fireball. Just the slow, steady release of pressure from a system that minutes earlier had been seconds away from catastrophe. The fire captain exhaled. Holy hell, he muttered. That could have taken out half the side panel. The mechanic sagged in relief and grabbed Ryan's forearm. You saved us, he said quietly. In Farsi, the words carried a weight that English couldn't touch. Ryan didn't answer. He just nodded. He knew what almost happened. He'd seen the aftermath of pressure failures overseas, twisted metal, scorched earth faces people didn't forget. The crew secured the valve. Fire trucks rolled back. Supervisors shouted new orders, trying to sound like they had everything under control all along. But everyone on the tarmac knew the truth. It was the baggage handler who saved the plane. And people were staring. Not with annoyance this time. With awe. With disbelief. With the uneasy realization that they had never not once seen him. The mechanic grabbed Ryan's shoulder. Please, he said in accented English, stay close. If they do inspection wrong, we need your voice. Ryan stepped back, shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the emotional aftershock. The adrenaline surge was wearing off. Someone approached behind him. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Ryan turned. It wasn't Dale. It wasn't security. It was the CEO of the airline, Linda Warren. Mid-50s, silver hair pulled tight. A woman known in the industry for shutting down entire operations with a single order if safety was compromised. She studied him for a long, evaluating moment. You're Keller, she said. Ryan straightened. Yes, ma'am. You're the linguist who answered that phone yesterday. He didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. She had seen enough to connect the dots. What you just did, she said quietly, prevented a full incident report, a runway shutdown, and possibly a multi-million-dollar disaster. Ryan swallowed hard. It wasn't just me, he said. The mechanics. No. She interrupted, her tone, soft but firm. It was you. None of this could have happened without your intervention. Around them, crew members were still staring. The tug operator, the fire captain, the airport cops. All of them murmuring, whispering, watching the man they'd spent years walking past, like part of the furniture. Then someone else arrived, breathless, red-faced, furious. Dale! He shoved through the crowd, glaring at Ryan with barely contained rage. What the hell are you doing? Dale demanded. You're assigned to Zone M. You abandoned your shift. You? The CEO raised one hand. And for the first time since Ryan had known him, Dale Granger went silent. Completely silent. Linda Warren kept her eyes locked on Ryan. "What's your rank in your prior service?" she asked. Ryan shook his head. "Ma'am, I don't think your rank, Mr. Keller." He hesitated. "Staff Sergeant," he said finally. "And your specialty?" He answered quietly. "Linguistic intelligence." She nodded, absorbing it all. Then she spoke loudly enough for every person on the tarmac to hear. "Mr. Keller, you are coming with me, right now." Around them, eyes widened in shock. Dale sputtered. "He can't just walk off, he's my employee." The CEO turned on him coldly. "Not anymore, he isn't." The murmur that rippled across the tarmac was instant. Ryan felt the air shift. The power dynamic was no longer what it had been an hour ago. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't even wanted to stand out. But he had kept a plane from exploding. He had saved a mechanic who couldn't make himself understood. He had prevented panic chaos and headlines that would have shaken the airline. And now everyone knew. As the CEO led him toward the terminal, past the cones, past the stunned crew, past a supervisor, who suddenly looked very small in his oversized authority vest, Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not vindication, something deeper. A quiet, steady certainty. The world had just changed. And this time it was changing in his direction. The walk from the tarmac to the executive terminal felt unreal, like Ryan was drifting through someone else's life. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in a rush of recycled terminal air and the faint scent of coffee from the nearest kiosk. Behind him, the emergency crews were still lingering around the aircraft, their voices low, their eyes occasionally drifting toward the spot where he'd stood moments earlier. A few ramp agents who'd witnessed the entire thing followed him with stunned silence. Nobody said anything, but their faces told the story. Confusion, respect, disbelief. One of them, a younger guy named Mason, kept shaking his head like he couldn't process what he'd just seen. As Ryan stepped inside the glass corridor, he felt the adrenaline draining, leaving a strange hollowness behind. His vest was streaked with dirt. His gloves still smelled faintly of burnt rubber. The CEO walked beside him with brisk certainty, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She didn't look at him, didn't speak. She simply moved forward as though she already knew where this was going. Airport security officers trailed behind them, but not because they were escorting him. It was because they didn't know whether they needed to. He wasn't a threat. But he wasn't just a baggage handler anymore either. At the far end of the corridor, the operations director and a cluster of regional managers were waiting. Their expressions stretched from polite confusion to something closer to panic. Ryan recognized two of them from internal trainings. Neither had ever bothered to remember his name. The CEO stopped in front of them, folding her arms. Conference room. Now. No one questioned her. Inside the room, the lights felt too bright. The long oak table gleamed like a stage waiting for a performance. Ryan stood near the door, still unsure whether he should sit. He didn't feel like he belonged anywhere near that table. The CEO turned to him. "Have a seat, Mr. Keller." He sat. Every manager in the room exchanged glances. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood behind her chair, hands resting on the leather back, looking at each person one by one. "You all witnessed what happened at Gate 62, she began. "And before we pretend that was routine, let me be absolutely clear, it was not." A murmur rippled through the room. "We were minutes from a catastrophic mechanical failure," she continued. "And the only reason that aircraft is still intact, and nobody was injured or killed, is because this man," she nodded toward Ryan, stepped in. Dale, who had been dragged into the room by sheer force of circumstance, shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand without looking at him. "No," she said. Not one word. He closed his mouth. She turned back to the others. "Now, before we talk about what's next, I want Mr. Keller to explain something." Ryan blinked. "Ma'am, I want them to hear it from you. Your background. All of it." The room stilled. Ryan felt the pressure of a dozen stares. He didn't want to talk about his past. He didn't want to be the center of anything. But the moment was here whether he welcomed it or not. He straightened in his chair. "I enlisted in the Air Force at 20, he began. Went through the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. Specialized in Farsi Dari and signals intelligence. Worked with joint operations overseas. Intercepted communications. Translated field intel. After that, I spent 4 years as an analyst stateside." The managers looked stunned. He continued quietly. "I left the service after my wife passed away in a car accident. I had a 2-year-old daughter. I couldn't deploy. I couldn't work shifts that kept me away all night. I needed something stable, something that kept a roof over our heads. So I took the first job that didn't require me to disappear for months at a time." The operations director blinked hard. "Which was ramp work." "It was what was available," Ryan said simply, "and it paid enough to survive." The room fell into a heavy silence. Not pity, recognition, understanding. The CEO leaned forward. "But what this company never did, what we failed to do, was read your file, or notice the applications you submitted for internal postings." She lifted a stack of printouts, flipping them onto the center of the table. 22 applications, all denied with cut-and-paste rejection messages, some unopened. She read one aloud. "Thank you for your interest, but we have chosen a more suitable candidate." She didn't hide the bitterness in her voice. Ryan felt heat dig behind his ribs. He'd lived with those words for years, words that translated roughly to, "Stay where you belong." But hearing them said aloud in front of the people who made the decisions, it felt different. It felt heavier. The CEO slid the stack toward the operations director. "We overlooked a veteran, a linguist, an analyst, and a man who saved lives today. We put him on a baggage belt while we paid contractors triple rates for work he could have done in 10 minutes. The operations director stared at the papers like they were evidence of a crime, and maybe in their own way they were. Then she turned to Dale. The shift supervisor straightened, jaw tightening. Sweat glistened at his hairline. "You disciplined Mr. Keller for a phone call," the CEO said softly. "You punished him for stepping in to help a confused passenger. And you publicly accused him of abandoning his post while he was retrieving a therapy dog for a child." Dale swallowed. "Ma'am, She cut him off like slicing thread. "Do you understand how that looks now?" His face flushed red. "I was following protocol." "No," she said, her voice like ice. "You were following prejudice." The air left the room. Even those who'd sat comfortably distant from the morning's events now leaned in the gravity, shifting entirely away from the supervisor who had always ruled his tiny kingdom through intimidation. For the first time since Ryan had known him, Dale looked small. The CEO stepped to the side of the table. "Mr. Keller, may I ask something personal?" He hesitated. "Of course. When did you decide you were finished being seen as invisible?" Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was quiet. Honest. Ryan took a breath. "Today," he said, "when I saw that mechanic trying to explain something that could have hurt a lot of people. When I remembered what it feels like to have information and no voice. When I realized I couldn't let someone else go unheard." The truth was deeper. Lily, his wife, the years of being unseen, but he didn't say those parts aloud. Not yet. The CEO nodded. Something softened in her expression, not sympathy, but respect. She looked around the room again. I'm formally launching an internal review into our promotion, hiring, and assignment practices, effective immediately. And before that review even starts, I'm making one more decision. She turned to Ryan fully. Mr. Keller, I want to offer you a new position. Ryan blinked. Ma'am, Director of Airside Communications and Safety Liaison, she said. You'll bridge language gaps with incoming crews, oversee communication protocols during mechanical emergencies, and train staff on international coordination. It's a senior role, full salary, benefits, better hours. The room erupted in whispers. Even the managers who'd spent years stepping over him, ignoring him, forgetting he existed, now stared like they were witnessing a transformation. Some with awe, some with guilt, some simply stunned. And in the back corner, Dale stared at the wall, jaw clenched, face empty. Ryan's stomach tightened. Not with fear, with the weight of a decision he hadn't ever expected to face. The CEO continued. This isn't a favor. It's not charity. It's recognizing a skill this company desperately needs and should have recognized years ago. She paused. But it's up to you. You can stay on the ramp if you want, or you can step into the role you were always qualified for. Everyone looked at him. Everyone waited. He felt the moment stretching like a held breath. The enormity of it, the shift in the air, all the years of exhaustion, humiliation, pushing through double shifts in cold rain, telling Lily that tomorrow would be easier. He thought of the mechanic on the tarmac, terrified and unheard. He thought of the girl with the therapy dog, clutching the carrier like it was the only safe thing in the world. He thought of Lily telling her grandfather that she wished people could see him. And he thought of his wife, whispering before she slipped away. Don't hide your gifts, not for me, not for anyone. He lifted his eyes. I'll accept, he said quietly. The CEO smiled for the first time. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a relieved one, because the company had gotten very, very lucky that a man they had buried for years had chosen to rise today. Good, she said. We begin tomorrow. The room released a collective exhale, but the CEO wasn't finished. She turned back to the managers, her voice steel again. And let this be a reminder, she said, that talent doesn't always come in the packaging you expect. Sometimes it's wearing work gloves and hauling suitcases while you overlook its resume. One by one, the managers dropped their gazes, and as she motioned for everyone to leave, she looked back at Ryan. There will be challenges, she said quietly. People won't all like the change. Some won't accept that the man they ignored now outranks them. Ryan nodded. I'm used to being underestimated. Not anymore, she replied. And with that, she stepped out of the room, leaving Ryan standing in the center, the weight of old wounds shifting, reshaping into something new. Something like purpose. Something like the beginning of the life he was supposed to have all along. The airport ran differently the very next morning. Word had spread faster than Ryan expected, faster than anyone could control. Ramp crews who barely nodded at him before now lifted a hand in greeting. Mechanics who would have walked past him without a glance stopped to thank him in their own ways. A quiet nod, a firm handshake, a hand on the shoulder. Even the fire captain gave him a respectful salute when their paths crossed near the fuel yard. And then there was Dale. He avoided Ryan entirely. When he finally crossed his path in the employee hallway, his face was drawn pale, stripped of the easy superiority he carried like a second uniform. He paused, opened his mouth, then closed it again. The apology never formed, not fully. But the way he lowered his gaze, the way he stepped aside to let Ryan pass, said enough. People who once dismissed him now saw him clearly. Not as a hero, not even Ryan believed that, but as someone who had been living beneath his worth for far too long. By noon, HR escorted him to an office on the second floor, not large, but bright with a window overlooking the south runways. The nameplate wasn't installed yet, but a typed sheet rested in its place: Ryan Keller, Airside Communications and Safety Liaison. Seeing his name there felt surreal, like the universe had shifted by a few degrees. He unpacked slowly photos of Lily, a framed picture of his wife from the early years of their marriage, his old Air Force Challenge coin. Each item made the room feel less like a borrowed space and more like something earned. That evening, he picked up Lily from his parents' house. She ran out the front door, her backpack bouncing, her hair flying. "Daddy, guess what Grandpa said you stopped a plane from blowing up?" Ryan sputtered. "That's not exactly what happened," but she was already climbing into his arms, hugging him tightly. "I knew you were the bravest," she whispered. "I told them that at school." He held her eyes, stinging in a way he didn't fight off this time. Her small confidence in him had carried him farther than she might ever know. A week later, during a company-wide briefing, the CEO introduced him to the full Airside team. Standing in front of the crowd, wearing a clean uniform shirt and a new badge clipped neatly to his belt, he felt something strange settle inside him. Not nerves, not pride, but a calm sense of purpose. Like the work ahead of him was finally aligned with who he was meant to be. He spoke to the group about communication failures, about respecting the skills hidden in plain sight, about the need to listen, to really listen to every voice on the field. Nobody looked away. Nobody checked their phones. They heard him, really heard him. And for the first time since he'd stepped onto that ramp years ago, he felt like he belonged in the room. 3 months passed. The safety protocols improved. New training programs rolled out. International crews coming into Atlanta now expected fluent communication, and got it. Ryan hired new linguists, and even helped a few ramp workers enroll in language courses the company agreed to fund. One afternoon, while walking through the concourse, he passed Mason, the young ramp agent, who used to be too nervous to speak up. Mason grinned. "Hey, Keller," guess what he said proudly? "I'm starting Spanish classes on Monday." Figured, why not try? Ryan smiled back. "Good. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." People were changing, not because of him, but because the culture finally made room for people to show their full selves. On a warm spring evening, Ryan and Lily sat together on the balcony of their modest apartment. She was drawing airplanes again this time, not from a place of escape, but excitement. "Daddy," she asked without looking up, "do people at your job see you now?" Ryan watched her pencil glide along the paper, forming the wings of a jet. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think they finally do. And does it feel good?" He nodded. "It feels right." She leaned against him, resting her head on his arm. The sunset spread gold across the sky, and he let the peace of the moment sink in. A year after everything changed, the airport hosted its annual Safety and Service Recognition ceremony. Ryan didn't expect anything more than a seat in the crowd. But near the end, the CEO stepped up to the microphone and looked directly at him. "This next award," she said, "goes to someone who reminded us what true leadership looks like. Someone who proved that titles don't define ability, and that sometimes the most vital talent is hidden in places too many people overlook." When she called his name, the applause rose like a wave. He stood there on the stage holding the glass award, feeling the warmth of hundreds of hands coming together. And when he glanced out across the room, he saw his daughter in the front row, feet not reaching the floor, clapping harder than anyone. Later that night, as they walked toward the parking lot, Lily slipped her hand into his. "Mom would have been proud," she said quietly. He swallowed. "I hope so." I know it, she whispered. Because you didn't give up. They reached the car, the glow of the terminal lights shining behind them, casting long shadows across the pavement. Ryan buckled her in, closed the door gently, and paused before taking the driver's seat. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Not because he had a better job, not because people finally respected him, but because he had stepped into the life he once feared he'd left behind and found it waiting for him. And as they drove away, the night soft around them, he realized something simple and true. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who rise quickly. They're the ones who rise again and again, until the world finally sees them.